Chapter 19 of Beren and Luthien. Among the tales of sorrow and of ruin that come down to us from the darkness of those days, there are yet some in which amid weeping there is joy, and under the shadow of death light that endures. And of these histories most fair still in the ears of the elves is the tale of Beren and Luthien. Of their lives was made the lay of Luthien, released from bondage, which is the longest, save one of the songs concerning the world of old. But here the tale is told in fewer words, and without song. It has been told that Beren would not forsake Dorthonion, and there Morgoth pursued him to the death, until at last there remained to him only 12 companions. Now the forest of Dorthonion rose southward into mountainous moors, and in the east of those highlands there lay a lake, Silmarillion, with wild heaths about it, and all that land was pathless and untamed, for even in the days of the long peace none had dwelt there. But the waters of Silmarillion were held in reverence, for they were clear and blue by day, and by night were a mirror for the stars. And it was said that Milan herself had hollowed the water in days of old. Thither Beren and his outlaws withdrew, and there made their lair, and Morgoth could not discover it. But the rumour of the deeds of Beren and his companions went far and wide, and Morgoth commanded Sauron to find them and destroy them. Now among the companions of Beren was Gorlim, son of Angrim. His wife was named Elenil, and their love was great ere evil befell. But Gorlim returned from the war upon the marches, and found his home plundered and forsaken, and his wife gone. Whether slain or taken, he knew not. Then he fled to Beren, and of his companions he was the most fierce and the most desperate. But doubt gnawed upon his heart, thinking that perhaps Elenil was not dead. At times he would depart alone and secretly, and visit his home that still stood amid the fields and woods that he had once possessed. This soon became known to the servants of Morgoth. On a time of autumn he came in the dusk of evening, and drawing near he saw as he thought a light upon the window, and coming warily he looked within. There he saw Elenil, and her face was worn with grief and hunger, and it seemed to him that he heard her voice lamenting that he had forsaken her. But even as he crowed alive, the light was blown out upon the wind. Wolves did howl, and upon his shoulders he felt suddenly the heavy hands of Sauron's hunters. Thus Gorlim was ensnared, and taking him to their camp, they tormented him, seeking to learn the hidings of Beren and all his ways. But nothing would Gorlim tell. Then they promised him that he should be released and restored to Elenil if he would but yield. Being at last worn with pain and yearning for his wife, he faltered. Straightway they brought him into the dreadful presence of Sauron, and Sauron spoke. "I hear now that thou wouldst barter with me. What is thy price?" And Gorlim answered that he should find Elenil again, and with her be set free, for he thought that Elenil also had been made captive. Then Sauron smiled, saying out, "That is a small price for so great a treachery. so surely should it be. Say on. Now Gollum would have drawn back, but daunted by the eyes of Sauron, he told at last all that he would know. And Sauron laughed, and he mocked Gollum, and revealed to him that he had seen only a phantom, devised by wizardry to entrap him, for Elendil was dead. Nonetheless, I will grant thy prayer, spoke Sauron. Thou shalt go to Elendil, and be set free of my service. And he put him cruelly to death. In this way the hiding of Behir was revealed, and Morgoth drew his net about it. The orcs, coming in the still hours before dawn, surprised the men of Dorthonion, and slew them all, save one. For Beren, son of Behir, had been sent by his father upon a perilous errand, to spy under the ways of the enemy, and he was far afield when the lair was taken. But as he slept, benighted in the forest, he dreamed that Garin birds sat thick as leaves upon the bare trees beside a mere. Blood was dripping from their beaks. Beren was then aware in his dream of a form that came to him from across the water. It was the tortured wraith of Gollum, and it spoke to him, declaring of his treachery and his death, and it bade him make all due haste to warn his father. With that Beren awoke, and sped through the night, and came back to the lair of the outlaws upon the second morning. But as he drew near, the Cairn birds rose from the ground, and sat in the older trees beside Tar Naloon, and croaked out in mockery. There Beren buried his father's bones, and raised a cairn of boulders above him, and swore upon it an oath of vengeance. First, therefore, he pursued the orcs that had slain his father and the last of his kinsmen. He found their camp by night at Rivel's Well, above the fen of Serric, and because of his woodcraft he came near to their fires unseen. Then the captain made boast of his deeds, holding up the hand of Behir that he had cut off as a token for Sauron and their mission that was fulfilled. The ring of Felagund was upon that hand. Beren sprang from behind a rock, slewing the captain, and taking the hand and the ring, he escaped, being defended by the Fates, for the orcs were dismayed, and their arrows flew wild. Thereafter, for 4 years more, Beren wandered still upon Dorthornon, a solitary outlaw. But he became the friend of the birds and of the beasts, and they did aid him, and they did not betray him. And from that time forth he ate no flesh, nor slew any living thing that was not upon its service of Morgoth. He did not fear death, he feared only captivity, and being bold and desperate he escaped both death and bonds, and the deeds of lonely daring that he achieved were noised abroad throughout Beleriand, and the tale of them came even into Doriath. At length Morgoth set a price upon his head, no less than the price upon the head of Fingon, High King of the Noldor, but the orcs fled rather at the rumour of his approach than to seek him out. Therefore any army was sent against him under the command of Sauron, and Sauron brought the werewolves, fell beasts inhabited by dreadful spirits that he had imprisoned upon their bodies. All that land was now become filled with evil, and all clean things were departing from it. Beren was pressed so hard that at last he was forced to flee from Luthien. In time of winter and snow he forsook the land and the grave of his father, and climbing into the high regions of Gorgoroth, the mountains of terror, he descried afar the land of Dorioth. There it was put into his heart that he would go down into the hidden kingdom, where no mortal foot had yet trodden. Terrible was his southward journey. Sheer were the precipices of Edgorgoth, and beneath their feet were shadows that were laid before the risings of the moon. Beyond lay the wilderness of Dungortheb, where the sorcery of Sauron and the power of Melen did come together. There horror and madness did walk. Spiders of the fell race of Ungoliant abode, spinning their unseen webs, in which all living things were snared, and monsters wandered there that were born in the long dark before the sun, hunting silently with their many blind eyes. No food for elves or men was there in that haunted land. Death only. That journey is not accounted least among the great deeds of Beren, but he spoke of it to no one after, lest those horrors did return to his mind. None know how he found a way, and so came by paths that no man, no elf, else ever dared to tread, to the borders of Doriath, and he passed through the mazes that Melen wove about the kingdom of Thingol, even as she had foretold, for a great doom lay upon him. It is told in the Lay of Luthien that Beren came stumbling into Doriath, grey and bowed as with many years of woe, so great had been the torment of the road. But wandering in the summer in the woods of Neldareth, he came upon Luthien, daughter of Thingol and Melen, and at a time of evening under moonrise, as she danced upon the unfading grass in the glades beside Escaldun, and all memory of his pain departed from him, he fell into an enchantment. For Luthien was the most beautiful of all the children of Iluvatar. Blue was her raiment, as the unclouded heaven, but her eyes were grey as the starlit evening. Her mantle was sewn with golden flowers, but her hair was dark as the shadows of twilight, as the light upon the leaves of trees, as the voice of clear waters, as the stars above the mists of the world. Such was her glory and her loveliness, and in her face a shining light. But she vanished from his sight, and he became dumb, as one that is bound with a spell, and he strayed long in the woods, wild and wary as a beast, seeking for her. In his heart he called her to Nuvil, that signifies the nightingale, the daughter of twilight, in the grey elven tongue, for he knew no other name for her, and he saw her afar as leaves in the winds of autumn, and in winter as a star upon a hill, but a chain was set upon his limbs. There came a time near dawn upon the eve of spring, and Luthien danced upon a green hill, and suddenly she began to sing. Keen, heart-piercing was her song, as the song of the lark that rises from the gates of night, and pours its voice among the dying stars, seeing the sun behind the walls of the world. And the song of Luthien released the bonds of winter, and the frozen waters spoke, and flowers sprang from the cold earth where her feet had passed. Then the spell of silence fell from Beren, and he called to her, crying, "Tinuviel," and the woods echoed the name. She halted in wonder and fled no more, and Beren came to her. But as she looked upon him, doom fell upon her, and she loved him. Yet she slipped from his arms and vanished from his sight, even as the very day was breaking. Beren then lay upon the ground in a swoon, as one slain at once by bliss and by grief. He fell into a sleep, as it were into an abyss of shadow, and upon waking he was cold as stone, and his heart was barren and forsaken. Wandering in mind, he groped as one that is stricken with sudden blindness, and seeks with its hands to grasp that vanishing light. Thus he began the payment of anguish for the fate that was laid upon him. And in his fate Luthien was caught, and being an immortal she shared in his mortality, and being free she received his chain, and her anguish was greater than any of the Eladella has ever known. Beyond his hope, she returned to him, where he sat in darkness, and long ago in the hidden kingdom she laid her hand upon his. Thereafter often she came to him, and they went in secret through the woods together from spring to summer, and no others of the children of Iluvatar have had a joy so great, though their time was so brief. But Beren the minstrel also loved Luthien, and he espied her meetings with Beren, and he betrayed them to Thingol, and the king was filled with anger, for Luthien he loved above all things, setting her above all the princes of the elves, whereas mortal men he did not even take into his service. Therefore he spoke in grief and amazement to Luthien, but she would reveal nothing, until he swore an oath to her that he would neither slay Beren nor imprison him. But he sent his servants to lay hands on him, and to lead him to Menegroth as a malefactor, and Luthien, forestalling them, led Beren herself before the throne of Thingol, as if he were an honored guest. Then Thingol looked upon Beren in scorn and in anger, but Milan was silent. "Who are you," said the king, "that come hither as a thief, and unbidden dare to approach my throne?" But Beren, being filled with dread, for the splendor of Menegroth and the majesty of Thingol were very great, and he answered nothing. Therefore Luthien spoke, and said, "He is Beren, son of Behir, lord of men, mighty foe of Morgoth, the tale of whose deeds is become a song even among the elves." "Let Beren speak," said Thingol. "What would you here, unhappy mortal? And for what cause have you left your own land to enter this, which is forbidden to such as you? Can you show reason why my power should not be laid on you in heavy punishment for your insolence and your folly?" Then Beren looked up, and beheld the eyes of Luthien, and his glance went also to the face of Milan, and it seemed to him that words were put within his mouth, and fear did leave him, and the pride of the eldest house of men returned to him, and he said, "My fate, O king, led me hither, through perils such as few even of the elves would dare. Here I have found what I sought not indeed, but finding I would possess forever. For it is above all gold, all silver, and beyond all of jewels. Neither rock, nor steel, nor the fires of Morgoth, nor all the powers of the elven kingdoms, shall keep from me the treasure that I desire. For Luthien, your daughter, is the fairest of all the children of the world. Silence fell upon the hall, for those that stood there were astounded and afraid, and they thought that Beren would be slain. But Thingol spoke slowly, saying, "Death you have earned with those words, and death you should find suddenly, had I not sworn an oath in haste, of which I repent, base-born mortal, who in the realm of Morgoth has learned to creep in secret, has his spies and his thralls." Then Beren answered, "Death you can give me, earned or unearned, but the names I will not take from you of base-born, nor spy, nor thrall. By the ring of Felagund, that he gave to Behir my father upon the battlefield of the north, my house has not earned such names from any elf, be he a king or no." His words were proud, and all eyes looked upon the ring, for he held it now aloft, and the green jewels gleamed there, that the Noldor had devised in Valinor, for this ring was like to twin serpents, whose eyes were emeralds, and their heads met beneath a crown of golden flowers, that the one upheld and the other devoured. That was the badge of Finnegan and his house. And Melon leaned to Thingol's side, and in whispered counsel bade him forego his wrath. "For not by you," she said, "shall Beren be slain, and far and free does his fate lead him in the end. Yet it is round with yours. Take heed." But Thingol continued to look in silence upon Luthien, and he thought upon his heart, "Unhappy men, children of little lords and brief kings, shall such as these lay hands upon you and yet live?" But then, breaking the silence, he spoke aloud, "I see the ring, son of Behir, and I perceive that you are proud, and deem yourself mighty. But a father's deeds, even had his service been rendered to me, avail not to win the daughter of Thingol and Melon. See now, I too desire treasure that is withheld, for rock and steel and the fires of Morgoth keep the jewel that I would possess, against all the power of the elven kingdoms. Yet I hear you say that bonds such as these do not daunt you. Go your way, therefore. Bring to me in your hand a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown, and then, if she will, Luthien may set her hand in yours. Then you shall have my jewel, and through the fate of Arda lie within the Silmarils, yet you shall hold me more generous." Thus he wrought the doom of Doriath, and was ensnared within the curse of Mandos. And those that heard these words perceived that Thingol would save his oath, and yet send Beren to his death, for they knew that not all the power of the Noldor, before the very siege was broken, had availed even to see from afar the shining Silmarils of Fëanor, for they were set upon that iron crown, and treasured in Angband above all wealth. Balrogs were about them, countless swords, strong bars, unassailable walls, and the dark majesty of Morgoth. But Beren laughed. "For so little a price," he said, "do elven kings sell their daughters. For gems, and things made by simple craft, But if this be your will, Thingol, I will perform it. And when we meet again, my hand shall hold the Silmaril from that iron crown. For you have not looked the last upon Beren, son of Behir." He then looked upon the eyes of Milan, who spoke not. He then bade farewell to Luthien, to Nuviel, and bowing before Thingol and Milan, he put aside the guards about him, and departed from Minagroth, alone. Then at last Milan spoke, and she said to Thingol, "O king, you have devised cunning counsel, but if my eyes have not lost their sight, this is ill for you. Whether Beren fail in his errand or achieve it, for you have doomed either your daughter or yourself. And now is Doriath drawn within the fate of the mightier realm." But Thingol answered, "I sell not to elves or men those whom I love and cherish above all the treasures. And if there were hope or fear that Beren should come back alive to Minagroth, he should not have looked again upon the light of heaven, though I had sworn it." But Luthien was silent, and from that hour she sang not again in Doriath. A brooding silence fell upon the woods, and the shadows lengthened in the kingdom of Thingol. It is told in the Lay of Luthien that Beren passed through Doriath unhindered, and came at length to the region of the Twilight Mares and the fens of Siren, and leaving Thingol's land he climbed the hills above the falls of Siren, where the river plunged underground with such great and terrible a noise. Thence he looked westward, and through the mist and rains that lay upon those hills he saw Talath Dernen, the guarded plain, stretching between Siren and Narog, and beyond he descried afar the highlands of Tarn and Feroth that rose above Nagathrond, and being destitute, without hope, and without counsel, he turned his feet hither. Upon all that plain the elves of Nagathrond kept an unceasing watch. Every hill upon its borders was crowned with hidden towers, and through all of its woods and fields archers ranged secretly and with a great craft, their arrows sure and deadly. Nothing crept there against their will. Therefore, ere Beren had come far upon his road, they were aware of him, and his death was nigh. But knowing his danger, he held ever aloft the ring of Felagund, and though he saw no living thing, because of the stealth of those hunters, he knew that he was watched, and cried often aloud, "I am Beren, son of Behir, friend of Felagund, take me to the king." Therefore the hunters slew him not, but assembling they waylaid him, commanding him to halt. But seeing the ring they did bow before him, though he was in evil plight, wild and wayworn, and they led him northward and westward, going by night lest their path should be revealed. For at that time there was no ford or bridge over the torrent of Narog before the gates of Nagathrond. But further to the north, where Gilglint joined Narog, the flood was less. And crossing there and turning again southward, the elves led Beren under the light of the moon to the dark gates of their hidden halls. Thus Beren came before King Finrod Felagund, and Felagund knew him, needing no ring to remind him of the kin of Beor and of Behir, and behind closed doors they sat. Beren told of the death of Behir, and of all that had befallen him in Doriath, and he wept, recalling Luthien and their joy together. But Felagund heard his tale in wonder and disquiet, and he knew that the oath he had sworn was come upon him for his death, so long before he had foretold to Galadriel. He spoke then to Beren in heaviness of heart. It is plain that Thingol desires your death, but it seems that this doom goes beyond his purpose, and that the oath of Fëanor is again upon work, for the Silmarils are cursed with an oath of hatred, and he that even names them a desire moves a great power from its slumber. The sons of Fëanor would lay all the elf kingdoms in ruin, rather than suffer any other than themselves to win or even possess a Silmaril, for that oath does drive them. And even now Celagorm and Cerfin are dwelling upon my halls. And though I, Finnefin's son, am king, they have won a stronger power in the realm, and lead many of their own people. They have sworn friendship to me in every need, but I fear that they will show neither love nor mercy to you, if your quest ever be told. Yet my own oath holds, and thus we are all ensnared. Then King Felagund spoke before his people, recalling the deeds of Behir and his vow, and he declared that it was laid upon him to aid the son of Behir in his need, and he sought the help of his chieftains. Then Celagorm rose amid the throng, and drawing out his sword he cried, Be he friend or foe, whether demon of Morgoth, or elf or child of men, or any other living thing in Arda, neither law nor love nor league of hell, nor might of the very Valar, nor any power of wizardry, shall defend him from the pursuing hate of Fëanor's son. If he take or find a Silmaril and keep it, for the Silmarils we alone claim, until the very world doth end. Many other words he spoke, as potent as were long before in Tyrion the words of his father, that first inflamed the Noldor to rebellion. And after Celagorm Cerfin spoke, more softly, but with no less power, conjuring in the minds of the elves a vision of war, and the ruin of Nargothrond. So great a fear did he set in their hearts, that never after, until the time of Turin, would any elf of that realm go into open battle, but with stealth and ambush, with wizardry and venom dart, they pursued all the strangers, forgetting bonds of kinship. Thus they fell from the valor and freedom of the elves of old, and their land was darkened. And now they murmured that Finnefin's son was not as a Valar to command them, and they turned their faces from him. But the curse of Mandos came upon the brothers. Dark thoughts arose in their hearts, thinking to send forth Felagund alone to his death, and to usurp him. It might be the throne of Nargothrond, for they were of the eldest line of the princes of the Noldor. And Felagund, seeing that he was forsaken, took from his head the silver crown of Nargothrond, and cast it upon his feet, saying, Your oaths of faith to me you may break, but I must hold my own bonds. Yet if there be any on whom the shadow of your curse has not yet fallen, I should find at least a few to follow me, and should not go home hence a beggar that is thrust from the gates. There were 10 that stood by him, and the chief of them, who was named Edrahil, stooping, did pick up the crown, and asked that it be given to a steward until Felagund's return. For you remain my king, and you remain theirs, he said, whatever fate betides. Then Felagund gave the crown of Nargothrond to Orodeth, his brother, to govern in his stead, and Celagorm and Cerfin said nothing, but they smiled and went from the halls. On an evening of autumn, Felagund and Beren set out from Nargothrond with their 10 companions, and they journeyed beside Nrog to his source in the falls of Ivrin, beneath the shadowy mountains that came upon a company of orcs. They slew them in their camp by night, and took their gear and their weapons, and by the arts of Felagund Their own forms and faces were changed into the likeness of the orc, and thus disguised, they came far upon the northward road, and ventured into the western pass, between Ered Withrin and the highlands of Tar Nafun. But Sauron in his tower was aware of them, and doubt took him, for they went in haste, and they stayed not to report their deeds, as was commanded to all the servants of Morgoth that passed that way. Therefore he sent to waylay them, and to bring them before him. Thus befell the contest of Sauron and Felagund, which is renowned. For Felagund strove with Sauron in songs of power, and the power of the king was very great, but Sauron has the mastery, as is told in the Lay of Luthien. He chanted a song of wizardry, a piercing opening of treachery, revealing, uncovering, betraying, then sudden Felagund their swaying, sang and answer a song of staying, resisting, battling against power, of secrets kept strength like a tower, and trust unbroken, freedom escape, of changing and of shifting shape, of snares eluded, broken traps, the prison opening, the chain that snaps. Backwards and forwards swayed their song, reeling and foundering as ever more strong. The chanting swelled, Felagund fought, and all the magic and might he brought, a elven ease into his words. Softly in the gloom they heard the birds, singing afar in Nargothrond, the sighing of the sea far beyond. Beyond the western world on sand of pearls in elven land. Then the gloom gathered, darkness growing, in Valinor the red blood flowing, beside the sea where the Noldor slew the foam riders and stealing drew their white ships with their white sails from lamplit havens, the wind that wails. The wolf howls, the ravens flee, the ice mutters in the mouths of the sea. The captive sad in Angborn mourn, thunder rumbles, the fire's born, and Finrod fell before the throne. Sauron then stripped them from their disguise. They stood before him naked and afraid. But though their kinds were revealed, Sauron could not discover their names nor their purpose. He cast them therefore into a deep pit, dark and silent, and threatened to slay them each cruelly, unless one would betray the truth to him. From time to time they saw two eyes kindled in the dark, and a werewolf devoured one of the companions, but none betrayed their lord. In the time when Sauron cast Beren into the pit, a weight of horror came upon Luthien's heart, and going to Milan for counsel, she learned that Beren lay in the dungeons of Tol Ingroth, without any hope of rescue. Then Luthien, perceiving that no help would come from any other on earth, resolved to fly from Doriath, and come herself to him. But she sought the aid of Dorian, and he betrayed her purpose to the king, and Thingol was filled with fear and with wonder, and because he could not deprive Luthien of the lights of heaven, lest she would ever fail and fade, and yet he would restrain her, he caused a house to be built from which she should not escape. Not far from the gates of Menegroth stood the greatest of all the trees in the forest of Neldoreth, and that was a beech forest, in the northern half of the kingdom. This mighty beech was named Hirlorn, and it had 3 trunks equal in girth, smooth and rind, and exceedingly tall. No branch grew from them for a great height above the ground. Far aloft between the shats of Hirlorn a wooden house was built, and there Luthien was made to dwell, and the ladders were taken away, and were guarded, save only when the servants of Thingol brought her such things as she did need. As it is told in the Lay of Luthien, how she escaped from the house in Hirlorn, for she put forth her arts of enchantment, and caused her hair to grow to great length, and of it she wove a dark robe, that wrapped her beauty like a shadow. It was laden with a spell of sleep. Of the strands that remained she twined a rope, and she let it down from a window, and as the ends swayed above the guards that sat beneath the tree, they fell into a deep slumber. Then Luthien climbed from her prison, and shrouded in her shadowy cloak, she escaped from all eyes, and vanished out of Doriath. It chanced that Celagorm and Carafun went upon a hunt through the guarded plain, and this they did because Sauron, being filled with suspicion, set forth many wolves into the Elflands. Therefore they took their hounds and rode forth, and they thought that ere they returned, they might also hear the tidings concerning King Felagund. Now the chief of the wolfhounds that followed Celagorm was named Horn. He was not born upon Middle-earth, but came from that blessed realm, for Orme had given him to Celagorm long ago in Valinor, and there he had followed the horn of his master before the evil came. Horn followed Celagorm into exile, and was faithful, and thus he too came under the doom of woe set upon the Noldor, and it was decreed that he should meet a death, but not until he encountered the mightiest wolf that would ever walk the world. Horn was that found Luthien, flying like a shadow, surprised by the daylight under the trees, when Celagorm and Curfin rested a while near to the eastern eaves of Doriath, for nothing could escape the sight and scent of Horn, nor could any enchantment stay him. And he slept not, neither by night nor day. He brought her to Celagorm, and Luthien, learning that he was a prince of the Noldor, and a foe of Morgoth, was glad. She declared herself, casting aside her cloak, and so great was her sudden beauty revealed beneath the sun, that Celagorm became enamoured of her. But he spoke her fair, and promised that she would find help in her need, if she returned with him now to Nargothrond. By no sign did he reveal that he knew already of Beren, and of his quest, of which she told, nor that it was a matter which touched him most dear. Thus they broke off their hunt, and returned to Nargothrond, and Luthien was betrayed, for they held her fast and took away her cloak, and she was not permitted to pass the gates, or to speak with any save their brothers, Celagorm and Curfin. And now, believing that Beren and Felagund were prisoners beyond hope of aid, they proposed to let the king perish, and to keep Luthien, and to force Thingol to give her hand to Celagorm. Thus they would advance their own power, and become the mightiest of the princes of the Noldor, and they did not propose to seek the Silmarils by craft or by war, or to suffer any others to do so, until they had all the might of the elven kingdoms under their own hands. Ordreth had no power to withstand them, for they swayed the hearts of the people of Nargothrond, and Celagorm sent messengers to Thingol, urging his suit. But Huan the Hound was true of heart, and the love of Luthien had fallen upon him in the first hour of their meeting, and he did grieve upon her captivity. Therefore he came often to her chamber, and at night he lay before her door, for he felt that evil had come to Nargothrond. Luthien spoke often to Huan in her loneliness, telling of Beren, who was the friend of all birds and beasts that did not serve Morgoth, and Huan understood all that was said, for he comprehended the speech of all things with voice, but it was permitted to him thrice only before his death to speak with words. Now Juan devised a plan for the aid of Luthien, and coming at a time of night he brought her cloak, and for the first time he spoke, and he gave her counsel. Then he led her by secret ways out of Nargothrond, and they fled north together. He did humble his pride, and suffer her to ride upon him in the fashion of a steed, even as the orcs did at times upon their great wolves. Thus they made great speed, for Juan was both swift and tireless. In the pits of Sauron, Beren and Felagund lay, and all their companions were now dead. But Sauron proposed to keep Felagund the last, for he perceived that he was a Noldor of both great might and wisdom, and he deemed that in him lay the secret of their errand. But when the wolf came for Beren, Felagund put forth all of his power, and he burst his bonds, and gripping he wrestled with the werewolf, and he slew it with his hands and with his teeth. Yet he himself was wounded to the death. He then spoke to Beren, saying, I go now to my long rest in those timeless halls, beyond the seas and the mountains of Aman. It will be long ere I am seen among the Noldor again, and it may be that we shall not meet a second time, in death or in life, for the fate of our kindreds are far apart. Farewell. He died then in the dark, in Tol Goroth, whose great tower he himself had built. Thus King Finrod Felagund, the fairest and most beloved of the house of Finwë, did redeem his oath. But Beren mourned him beside him in despair. In that hour Luthien came, and standing upon the bridge that led to Sauron's Isle, she sang a song that no walls of stone could hinder, and Beren heard, and he thought that he dreamed, for the stars shone above him, and in the trees nightingales were singing. And in answer he sang a song of challenge that he made in praise of those 7 stars, the sickle of the Valar, that Varda hung above the north, as a sign for the fall of Morgoth. Then all strength did leave him, and he fell down into darkness. But Luthien heard his answering voice. She sang then a song of great power. The wolves they howled, the isle trembled. Sauron stood in the high tower, wrapped in his own black thoughts. But he smiled, hearing her voice, for he knew it was the daughter of Milan, the fame of the beauty of Luthien, the wonder of her song, had long gone forth from Doriath. He thought to make her captive, and hand her over to the power of Morgoth, for his reward would be great. Therefore he sent a wolf to the bridge, but Juan slew it silently. Still Sauron sent others, one by one, and one by one Juan took them by the throat and slew them. Then Sauron sent Droglun, a dread beast, old in his evil, lord and sire of the werewolves of Angband. His might was great, and the battle of Juan and Droglun was long, and it was fierce. Yet at length Droglun escaped, and fleeing back into the tower, he threw himself and died before Sauron's feet. As he died, he told his master, "One is there." Now Sauron knew well, as did all in the land, the fate that was decreed for the Hound of Valinor. It came into his thought that he himself would accomplish it. Therefore he took upon himself the form of the werewolf, and made himself the mightiest that had yet to walk the world, and he came forth to win the passage of the bridge. So great was the horror of his approach, that one leapt aside, and Sauron sprang and leapt upon Luthien. She swooned before the menace of that fell spirit in his eyes and the foul vapours of his breath. But even as he came, falling, she cast a fold of her dark cloak before his eyes, and he did stumble, for a fleeting drowsiness came upon him. And upon that one sprang. There befell the battle of one and the wolf Sauron, and the howls and the baying echoed and roared in the hills, and the watchers on the walls of Erdwithrin across the valley heard it afar, and were dismayed. But no wizardry, no spell, neither fang nor venom nor devil's art nor beast strength could overthrow Juan of Valinor, and he took his foe by the throat, and he did pin him, and Sauron shifted shape from wolf to serpent, and from monster, then to his own accustomed form. But he could not elude the grip of Juan without forsaking his body utterly, ere his foul spirit leave its dark house. Luthien came to him, and said that he should be stripped of his raiment of flesh, and his ghost be sent quaking back to Morgoth. And she said, there everlasting, thy naked self shall endure the torment of his scorn, pierced by his eyes, unless thou yield to me the mastery of your tower. Sauron yielded himself, and Luthien took the mastery of the isle, and all that was there, and Juan released him, and immediately he took the form of a vampire, great as a dark cloud across the moon, and he fled, dripping the blood from his throat upon the trees, and came to Tar Narfun, and dwelt there, filling it with his horror. Then Luthien stood upon the bridge, and declared out her power, and the spell was loose that bound stone to stone, and the gates threw themselves down, and the walls did open, and the pits did open and lay themselves bare. Many a thrall and captive came forth in wonder and dismay, shielding their eyes against that pale moonlight, for they had long lain in the darkness of Sauron. But Beren came not. Therefore Juan and Luthien sought him upon the isle. Luthien found him mourning by Felagund. So deep was his anguish that he lay still upon him, and did not hear her feet. Her, thinking him already dead, did put her arms about him, and fall into a dark forgetfulness. Beren, coming back to the light out of the pits of his despair, did lift her up, and they looked again one upon the other, and the day rising over the dark hills shone upon them. They buried the body of Felagund upon the hill-top of his own isle, and it was clean again, and the green grave of Finrod, Finnefin's son, fairest of all the princes of the elves, remained in Voliet, until the land was changed, and the very bones of the mountains were broken, and foundered under the destroying seas. But Finrod walks with Finnefin his father beneath the trees in Eldamar. Now Beren and Luthien to Nuviel went free again and together, and walked through the woods, renewing for a time their joy. And though winter came, it did hurt them not, for flowers lingered where Luthien went, and birds sang beneath those snow-clad hills. But Juan, being faithful, went back to Celegorm his master, yet their love was less than before. There was tumult in Nargothrond, for thither now returned many elves that had been prisoners in the Isle of Sauron, and a clamour rose that no words of Celegorm could still. They lamented bitterly the fall of Felagund their king, saying that a maiden had dared that which the sons of Fëanor had not dared to do. But many perceived that it was treachery, rather than fear, that had guided Celegorm and Curfin. Therefore the very hearts of the people of Nargothrond were released from their dominion, and turned again to the house of Finarfin. They obeyed Orodreth, but he would not suffer them to slay the brothers, as many did desire, for the spilling of kindred blood by kin would bind the curse of Mandos closely upon them all. Yet neither bread nor rest would he grant to Celegorm and Curfin within his realm, and he swore that there should be little love between Nargothrond and the sons of Fëanor thereafter. "Let it be so," said Celegorm, and there was a light of menace in his eyes. But Curfin smiled. Then they took horse, and they rode away like fire, to find if they might their kindred in the east. But none would go with them, not even those that were of their own people, for all perceived that a curse lay heavily upon the brothers, and that an evil did follow them. In that time Celebrimbor, the son of Curfin, repudiated the deeds of his father, and remained in Nargothrond. Yet Juan followed still the hosts of Celegorm, his master. Northward they rode, for they intended in their haste to pass through Dimbar, and along the north marches of Doriath, seeking the swift road to Himring, where Maedhros their brother dwelt. And still they might hope with speed to traverse it, since it lay close to Doriath's borders, shunning Dan Dangotheb and the distant menace of those mountains of terror. Now it is told that Beren and Luthien came in their wandering into the forest of Brethil, and drew near at last to the borders of Doriath. Then Beren took thought of his vow, and against his heart he resolved, when Luthien was come again within the safety of her own land, to set forth once more. But she was not willing to be parted from him again, saying, "You must choose, Beren, between these two, to relinquish the quest and your oath, and seek a life of wandering upon face of earth, or to hold to your word and challenge the power of darkness upon its throne. But on either road you go, I go with you. Our doom shall be alike." Even as they spoke together these things, walking without heed of aught else, Celegorm and Curfin rode up, hastening through the forest, and the brothers espied them, and knew them from afar. Celegorm turned his horse, and spurred it upon Beren, proposing to ride him down. But Curfin, swerving, stooped, and lifted Luthien to his saddle, for he was a strong and cunning horseman. Then Beren sprang from before Celegorm, full upon the speeding horse of Curfin that had pursued him, and the leap of Beren is renewed among elves and men. He took Curfin by the throat from behind, and did hurl him backwards, and fall to the ground together. The horse reared and fell, but Luthien was swung aside, and she lay upon the grass. Then Beren throttled Curfin, but death was near him, for Celegorm rode upon him with spear. In that hour Horn forsook the service of Celegorm, springing upon him so that his horse swerved aside, and would not approach Beren because of the terror of that great hound. Celegorm cursed both hound and horse, but Juan was unmoved. Then Luthien, rising, forbade the slaying of Curfin. But Beren despoiled them of his gear and his weapons, and he took his knife Angrist, the knife that was made by Telkar of Novgorod, and hung sheathless by his side. Iron it would cleave as if it were green wood. Then Beren, lifting Curfin, flung him from him, and bade him walk now back to his noble kinsfolk, who might teach him to turn his valour to a worthier use. Ye horse, I said, I keep for the service of Luthien, and it may be accounted happy to be free of such a master. Curfin cursed Beren under cloud and sky. Go hence, he said, unto a swift and bitter death. Celegorm took him beside him on his horse, and the brothers made then as if to ride away. Beren turned away and took no heed of their words, but Curfin, being filled with his shame and with his malice, took the bow of Celegorm, and shot back as they went, the arrow aimed at Luthien. Huan, leaping, caught it in his mouth. So Curfin shot again, and Beren sprang from Luthien, and the dart did smote him within his breast. It is told then that Huan pursued the sons of Fëanor, and they did flee in fear, and returning he brought to Luthien a herb out of the forest. With that leaf she staunched Beren's wound, and by her arts and by her love she did heal him and bring him back, and thus at last they returned to Doriath. There Beren, being torn between his oath and his love, and knowing Luthien to be now safe, arose one morning before the sun, and committed her to the care of Huan. Then in great anguish he departed, while she yet slept upon the grass. He rode northward again with all speed to the pass of Siren, and coming to the skirts of Tau Nafun, he looked out across the waste of Anfaglith, and saw afar the peaks of Thangodrim. There he dismissed the horse of Curfin, and bade it leave now dreaded and servitude, and run free upon the green grass and the lands of Siren. Then, being now alone, and upon the threshold of the final peril, he made a song of parting, in praise of Luthien and the lights of heaven, for he believed that he must now say farewell to both the love and light. For that song these words were part. Farewell, sweet earth and northern sky, forever blessed since where did lie, and here their lissom limbs did run, beneath the moon, beneath the sun. Luthien, Tinuviel, more fair than mortal tongue can tell, though all to ruin fell the world, and were dissolved and backward hurled, unmade into the old abyss, yet were its making good for this, the dusk, the dawn, the earth, the sea, that Luthien for time should be. He sang aloud, caring not what ear should overhear him, but he was desperate, and he looked for no escape. But it was Luthien who heard his song, and she sang back in answer, as she came through the woods unlooked for Huan, consenting once more to be her steed, had borne her swiftly hard upon Beren's trail. Long he had pondered in his heart what counsel he could devise for the lightening of the peril of these two whom he did love. He turned aside therefore at Suren's Isle, as they ran northward again, and he took thence the ghastly Wolfheim of Throglun, and the bat fell of Thingarith. She was the messenger of Sauron, and was wont to fly in vampire form to Angband, and her great fingered wings were barbed at each joint's end with iron claw. Clad in these dreadful garments, Huan and Luthien ran through Tar Nafun, and all things did flee before them. Beren, seeing their approach, was dismayed, and he wondered, for he had heard the voice of Tinuviel, and he thought it now a phantom for his ensnaring. But they halted, and cast aside their disguise, and Luthien ran towards him. Thus Beren and Luthien met again between desert and wood. For a while he was silent, and was glad, but after a space he strove once more to dissuade Luthien from her journey. "Thrice now I cursed my oath to Thingol," he said, "and I would that ye had slain me in Mengrath, rather than I should bring you under the shadow of Morgoth." Then for the second time Huan spoke with words, and he counselled Beren, saying, "From the shadow of death you can no longer save Luthien, for by her love she is now subject to it. You can turn from your fate and lead her into exile, seeking peace in vain while your life doth last. But if ye will not deny your doom, then either Luthien, being forsaken, must assuredly die alone, or she must with you challenge the fate that lies before you, hopeless, yet not certain. Further counsel I cannot give, nor may I go further upon your road, but my heart forebodes that what you find at the gate I shall myself see. All else is dark to me, yet it may be that our three paths lead back to Doriath. We may yet meet again before the end." Beren then perceived that Luthien could not be divided from the doom that lay upon them both, and he sought no longer to dissuade her. So by the counsel of Huan and the arts of Luthien, he was arrayed now in the hame of Droglin, and she in the winged fell of Thungathil. Beren became in all things like a werewolf to look upon, save that upon his eyes there shone a spirit, grim indeed, but clean. Horror was in his glance as he saw upon his flank a bat-like creature, clinging with creased wings. Then howling under the moon, he did leap down the hill, and the bat did wheel and flitter above him. They passed through all perils, until they came with dust of their long and weary road upon them to the drear dale that lay before the gate of Angband. Black chasms opened beside the road. Here forms as of withering serpents issued. On either hand the cliffs stood as embattled walls, and upon them sat Caranval, crying with their fell voices. Upon them, before them was the impregnable gate, an arch both wide and dark upon the foot of the mountain, and above it reared 1,000 feet of precipice. There dismay took them, for at the gate was a guard of whom no tidings had yet gone forth. Rumour of he knew not what designs abroad among the princes of the elves had come to Morgoth, and ever down the aisles of the forest was heard the baying of Huan, the great hound of war, whom long ago the Valar unleashed. Then Morgoth recalled the doom of Huan, and he chose one from among the whelps of the race of Droglin. He fed him with his own hand upon the living flesh, and put his powers upon him. Swiftly the wolf grew, until he could creep into no den, but lay huge and hungry before the very feet of Morgoth. There the fire and the anguish of hell did enter into him. He became full with a devouring spirit, tormented, terrible, and strong. Gargaroth, the Red Maw, he is named in the tales of those days, and Anfaglir, the jaws of thirst. Morgoth set him to lie unsleeping before the doors of Angband, lest Huan come. Now Karkaroth espied them from afar. He was filled with doubt, for news had long been brought to Angband that Doroglund was dead. Therefore, when they approached, he denied them entry. He bade them stand, and he drew near with his menace, scenting something strange in the air about them. Suddenly some power descended from afar, old from a divine race, possessed Luthien, and casting back her foul raiment, she stood forth, small before the might of Karkaroth, but radiant and terrible. Lifting up her hand, she commanded him to sleep, saying, "O woe-begotten spirit, fall now into dark oblivion, and forget for a while the dreadful doom of life." At that Karkaroth was felled, as though lightning itself had smitten him. Then Beren and Luthien went through the gate, and down those labyrinthine stairs. Together wrought the greatest deed that was ever been dreamed by elves or men, for they came to the seat of Morgoth in his nethermost hall, that was upheld by horror, lit by fire, and filled with the weapons of death and torment. There Beren slunk in wolf's form beneath the throne, but Luthien was stripped of her disguise by the will of Morgoth, and he bent and placed his gaze upon her. She was not daunted by his eyes, and she named her own name, and offered her service to sing before him, after the manner of a minstrel. Morgoth, looking upon her beauty, conceived in his thoughts an evil lust, and a design more dark than any that had come into his heart since he fled from Valinor. Thus he was beguiled by his own malice, for he watched her, leaving her free for a while, and taking secret pleasures in his thoughts. Then suddenly she eluded his sight, and out of the shadows began a song of such surpassing loveliness and of such blinding power that he listened, perforce, and a blindness did come upon him. His eyes did roam to and fro, seeking her. All in his court were cast down in slumber, and all the fires faded and were quenched. But the Silmarils and the crown on Morgoth's head did blaze forth suddenly with a radiance of their white flame, and the burden of that crown and of those jewels bowed down his head, as though the world itself were set upon it, laden with a weight of care, of fear, and of desire that even the will of Morgoth could not support. Luthien catched up her winged robe and sprang into the air. Her voice came dropping down like rain into pools, profound and dark. She cast her cloak before his eyes, and set upon him a dream, dark as the outer void, where once he walked alone. He fell, suddenly, as a hill sliding in avalanche, and hurled like thunder from his throne, lay prone upon the floors of hell. The iron crown rolled echoing from his head. All things were still. As a dead beast, Beren lay upon the ground, but Luthien, touching him with her hand, aroused him, and he cast aside the wolf-hame. Then he drew forth the knife Angrist, and from the iron claws that held it, he cut the Silmaril. As he closed it in his hand, the radiance welled through his living flesh, and his hand became as a shining lamp. But the jewel did suffer his touch, and it burned him not. It came then into Beren's mind that he would go beyond his vow, and bear out of Angren all 3 of the jewels of the Fëanor. But since was not the doom of the Silmarils, the knife Angra snapped, and a shard of the blade, flying, smote the very cheek of Morgoth. At this he groaned, and he stirred, and all the host of Bangban did move in their sleep, and terror fell upon Beren and Luthien, and they fled, heedless, without disguise, desiring only to see the light of the stars once more. They were neither hindered, nor were they pursued, but the gate was held against their going out, for Karath had risen from his sleep. He stood now in wrath upon the very threshold of Angband, and before they were aware of him, he saw them, and sprang upon them as they ran. Luthien was spent. She had not time nor strength to quell this wolf, and Beren stood forth before her. In his right hand he held aloft the Silmaril. Karkaroth halted, and for a moment he was afraid. "Get you gone. Fly," cried Beren, "for here is a fire that shall consume you, and all the evil of things." And he thrust the Silmaril before the eyes of the wolf. Karkaroth looked upon that holy jewel. He was not daunted. The devouring spirit within him awoke as the sudden fire, and gaping he took suddenly the hand within his own jaws, and he bit it off upon the wrist. Upon doing so, all of his innards were filled with the flame of anguish, for the Silmaril did sear his accursed flesh. Howling, he fled before them, and the walls of the valley of the gate echoed with the clamor of his torment. So terrible did he become in his madness, that all the creatures of Morgoth that abode in that valley were upon any of the roads that led hither, and they fled both far away, for he slew all the living things that stood in his path, and burst from the north with ruin upon the world. Of all the terrors that came ever into Beleriand ere Angband's fall, the madness of Karkaroth was one of the most dreadful, for the power of the Silmaril was hidden deep within him. Beren lay in swoon within those perilous gates, and death did draw nigh for him, for there was a venom upon the fangs of that wolf. Luthien with her lips drew out the venom, and she put forth her failing powers to staunch that hideous wound. But behind her in the depths of Angband, the rumour grew of a great wrath aroused. The hosts of Morgoth had become awakened. Thus the quest for the Silmaril was likely to have ended in ruin and in despair. But in that hour, above the wall of the valley, 3 mighty birds appeared, flying northward with wings swifter than the wind. Among all the birds and beasts the wandering and the need of Beren had been noised, and Juan himself had bidden for all things to watch, that they might bring him aid. High above the realm of Morgoth, Throndor and his vassals soared, and seeing now the madness of the wolf and Beren's fall, they came both swiftly down, even as the powers of Angband were released from the toils of their sleep. They then lifted up Luthien and Beren from the earth, and bore them aloft into the clouds. Below them the thunder rolled, the lightning leapt upward, and the mountains did quake. Fire and smoke belched forth from Thongor. The flaming bolts were hurled far abroad, falling ruinous upon the lands, and the Noldor and Hithlum trembled. But Thorndor took his way far above the earth, seeking the high roads of heaven, where the sun was day-long, and shines unveiled, and the moon walks amid the cloudless stars. Thus they passed swiftly over Dor Nor Foglith, and overtow na Faroon, and came above the hidden valley of Tumladin. No cloud nor mist lay there, and looking down Luthien saw far below, as a white light, starting from a green jewel, the radiance of Gondolin, the fair, where Turgon dwelt. But she wept, for she thought that Beren would surely die, for he spoke no word, nor did he open his eyes, and knew thereafter nothing of his flight. At last the eagle set them down upon the borders of Doriath, and they were come to that same dell whence Beren had stolen in despair, and left Luthien asleep. There the eagles laid her at Beren's side, and returned once more to the peaks of Kissagrip, and to their high eyries. But one came to her, and together they tended Beren, even as before when she healed him of the wound that Curufin gave to him. But this wound was fell, and was poisonous, and long did Beren lay, and his spirit wandered upon the dark borders of death, knowing ever an anguish that pursued him from dream to dream. Then suddenly, when her hope was almost spent, he woke again, and looking up, seeing leaves against the sky, and he heard beneath the leaves, singing soft and slow beside him, Luthien to Nuviel, and all was spring again. Thereafter Beren was named Ecomin, which is the one-handed, and suffering was graven into his face. But at last he was drawn back to life by the love and light of Luthien. He arose, and together they walked in the woods once more, and they did not hasten from that place, for it did seem fair to them. Luthien, indeed, was willing to wander in the wild without ever returning, forgetting home and people and all the glory of the elf kingdoms. For a time Beren was content, for he could not for long forget his oath to return to Menegroth, nor would he withhold Luthien from Thingol forever, for he held by the law of men, deeming it perilous to set it not the will of the Father, save upon the last of needs. It seemed also to him unfit that one so royal and fair as Luthien should live always in the woods as the rude hunters of men, without home or honour or the fair things which are the delight of the queens of the Eladil. Thereafter a while he persuaded her, and their 4 steps forsook the houseless lands. He paused into Doriath, leading Luthien home, so their dooms did will it. Upon Doriath evil days had fallen. Grief and silence had come upon all its people when Luthien was lost. Long they had sought for her in vain, and it is told that in that time Darien the minstrel of Thingol strayed from the land, and was seen no more. He it was that made music for the dance and song of Luthien, before Beren came to Doriath. He had loved her. He had set all his thoughts of her in his music, and he became the greatest of the minstrels of the elves, east of the sea, named even before Meglor, son of Fëanor. But seeking for Luthien in despair, he wandered upon strange paths, and passing over the mountains, he came into the east of Middle-earth, where for many ages he made lament beside the dark waters for Luthien, daughter of Thingol, most beautiful of all of living things. In that time Thingol turned to Milan, but now she withheld her counsel from him, saying that the doom that he had devised must work to its appointed end, and that he must wait now upon time. But Thingol learned that Luthien had journeyed Far from Doriath, for messengers came secretly from Celegorm, as has been told, saying that Felagund was dead, Beren was dead, but that Luthien was in Nagathron, and that Celegorm would wed her. Then Thingol was wrathful, and he sent forth his own spies, thinking to make war upon Nagathron. Thus did he learn that Luthien was again fled, and that Celegorm and Curfin were driven from Nagathron. And his counsel was in doubt, for he had not the strength to assail the 7 sons of Fëanor. But he sent messengers to Himring to summon their aid in seeking for his daughter Luthien, since Celegorm had not sent her to the house of her father, nor had he kept her safely. But in the north of his realm his messengers met with a peril sudden and unlooked for, the onslaught of Karath, the wolf of Angband. For in his madness he had run ravening from the north, and passed at length over Tar Nafun. Upon its eastern side he came down from the sources of Isgildun like a destroying and mighty fire. Nothing hindered him. The might of Milan upon the borders of the land stayed him not, for fate did drove him, and the power of the Silmaril that he bore to his torment. Thus he boasts into the inviolate louds of Doriath. All fled in fear. Alone of the messengers Mabalung, chief captain of the king, escaped, and he brought those dead tidings to Thingol. Even in that dark hour Beren and Luthien returned, hastening from the west, and the news of their coming went before them like a sound of music borne by the wind into dark houses where men sit sorrowful. They came at last to the gates of Menegroth. A great host followed them. Then Beren led Luthien before the throne of Thingol her father, and he looked in wonder upon Beren, whom he had thought dead. But he loved him not, because of the woes that had been brought upon Doriath. But Beren knelt before him, and saying, I returned according to my word. I am come now to claim of your own. And Thingol answered, What of your quest? What of your vow? And Beren said, It is fulfilled. Even now the Silmaril is clenched within my hand. And Thingol said, Show it to me. So Beren put forth his left hand, slowly opening its fingers, but it was empty. Then he held up his right arm, and from that hour he named himself Camlost, the empty-handed. Thingol's mood was softened, and Beren sat before his throne upon the left, and Luthien upon the right, and they told all the tale of the quest, while all there listened and were filled with amazement. It seemed to Thingol that this man was unlike all other mortal men, and among the great in ardour, and the love of Luthien a thing new and strange. He perceived that their doom might not be withstood by any power of the world. Therefore, at the last he yielded his will, and Beren took the hand of Luthien before the throne of her father. But now a shadow fell upon the joy of Doriath at the return of Luthien the Fair. For learning of the cause of the madness of Carcharoth, the people grew even more afraid, perceived that his danger was fraught with dreadful power, because of the holy jewel within his gut, and hardly might be overthrown. Beren, hearing of the onslaught of the wolf, understood that his quest was not yet fulfilled. Therefore, since daily Carcharoth drew nearer to Menegroth, they prepared the hunting of the wolf. Of all pursuits of beasts thereafter, tales tell the most perilous. To that chase went Wand the hound of Valinor, and Mablung of the heavy hand, Beleg Strongbow and Beren Ikraman, Thingol the king of Doriath. They rode forth in the morning, and passed over the river Esgildun. But Luthien remained behind upon the gates of Menegroth. A dark shadow fell upon her, and it seemed to her that the sun had sickened and turned black. The hunters turned both east and north, and following the course of the river, they came at last upon Carcharoth the wolf in a dark valley, down the northern side whereof Isgildun fell in a torrent over steep falls. At the foot of the falls Carcharoth drank to try and ease his consuming thirst, and he howled, and thus they were aware of him. But him, espying their approach, rushed not suddenly to attack. It may be that the devil's cunning of his heart awoke, being for a moment eased of his pain by those sweet waters of Esgildun, and even as they rode towards him, he slunk aside into a deep brake. There he lay hid. They set a guard about all that place and waited, and the shadows grew long in the forest. Beren stood beside Thingol, and suddenly they were aware that one had left their side. Then a great baying awoke in the thicket, for one, becoming impatient, and desiring to look upon this wolf, had gone in alone to dislodge him. But Carcharoth avoided him, and bursting from the thorns, leapt suddenly upon Thingol. Swiftly Beren strode before him with spear, but Carcharoth swept it aside, and felled him, biting upon his breast. In that moment Wand leapt from thicket upon the back of the wolf, and they fell together, both fighting bitterly. No battle of wolf or hound has been like to it, for in the baying of horn was heard the voice of the horns of Arome, and the wrath of the very Valar. But in the howls of Carcharoth was the hate of Morgoth, and a malice crueler than the teeth of steel. The rocks were rent by their clamour, and fell from on high, and choked the falls of Isgildun. There they fought to the death, but Thingol gave no heed, for he knelt by Beren, seeing that he was sorely hurt. Huan in that fight an hour slew Carcharoth, but there in the woven woods of Doriath his own doom, long spoken, was fulfilled. He was wounded mortally. The venom of Morgoth had entered into him. And he came, and falling beside Beren, spoke for his third time with his words. He bade Beren farewell before he died. Beren spoke not, but lay his hand upon the head of that hound. And so did they part. Mablung and Beleg came hastening to the king's aid, but when they looked upon what was done, they cast aside their spears and wept. Mablung took a knife and ripped up the belly of the wolf, and within he was well nigh all consumed as with a mighty fire. But the hand of Beren that had held the jewel was yet incorrupt, but when Mablung reached forth to touch it, the hand was no more, and the Silmaril lay there unveiled. The light of it filled the shadow of the forest all about them. Quickly, and in fear, Mablung took it, and set it in Beren's living hand. At this Beren was aroused by the touch of the Silmaril. He did hold it aloft, and he bade Thingol to receive it. "Now is the quest achieved," he said. "My doom has been full wrought." And at that he spoke no more. They bore back Beren Cumlos, son of Behir, upon a bier of branches, with Huan the wolfhound at his side, and night fell ere they returned to Menegroth. At the feet of Hirlorn, the great beech Luthien met them walking slow, and some bore torches beside the bier. She set her arms about Beren, and did kiss him, bidding him await her beyond the western sea. And he looked upon her eyes ere the spirit left him. But the starlight was quenched, and darkness had fallen even upon Luthien to Nuviel. Thus ended the quest of the Silmaril. But the lay of Luthien, which released from bondage, does not end. For the spirit of Beren, at her bidding, tarried in the halls of Mandos, unwilling to leave the world, until Luthien came to say her last farewell upon the dim shores of the outer sea, whence men that die set out never to return. But the spirit of Luthien fell down into darkness, and at the last it fled, and her body lay like a flower that is suddenly cut off, and lies for a while unwithered upon the grass. Then a winter, as it were the hoar age of mortal men, fell upon Thingol. But Luthien came to the halls of Mandos, where are the appointed places of the Eladel, beyond the mansion of the west, upon the confines of the world. There those that wait sit in the shadow of their thought. But her beauty was more than their beauty, and her sorrow deeper than their sorrows. She knelt before Mandos, and sang to him. The song of Luthien before Mandos was the song most fair that ever in words was woven, and the song most sorrowful that e'er the world shall hear, unchanged, imperishable. It is sung still in Valinor, beyond the very hearing of the world, and listening, the Valar are grieved. For Luthien wove two themes of words, of the sorrow of the Eldar, and the grief of men. Of the two kindreds that were made by Ilúvatar to dwell in Arda, the kingdom of earth amid the innumerable stars. And as she knelt before him, her tears fell upon his feet like rain upon the stones, and Mandos was moved to pity, who never before was so moved, nor has been since. Therefore he summoned Beren, and even as Luthien had spoken in the hour of his death, they met again beyond the western sea. But Mandos had no power to withhold the spirits of men that were dead within the confines of the world, and their time of waiting, nor could he change the fates of the children of Ilúvatar. He went therefore to Manwë, lord of the Valar, who governed the world under the hand of Ilúvatar, and Manwë sought counsel in his inmost thought, where the will of Ilúvatar was revealed. These were the choices that he gave to Luthien. Because of her labours and her sorrow, she should be released from Mandos, and go to Valamar, there to dwell until the world's end among the Valar, forgetting all her griefs that her life had known. But thither Beren could not come, for it was not permitted to the Valar to withhold death from him, which is the gift of Ilúvatar to men. But the other choice was this: she might return to Middle-earth, and take with her Beren, there to dwell again, but without certitude of life or of joy. She would become mortal, she would be subjected to a second death, even as he, and ere long she would leave the world forever, and her beauty becoming only a memory in song. This doom she chose. She forsake the blessed realm, and putting aside all claim to kinship with those that dwell there, that thus whatever grief might lie in wait, the fates of Beren and Luthien might be joined. And their paths led together beyond the confines of the world. So it was that alone of the Eladeli she has died indeed. She has left the world long ago, yet in her choice the two kindreds have been joined, and she is the forerunner of many in whom the Eldar see yet, though all the world is changed, the likeness of Luthien the beloved, whom they have lost.